A.3.8. What is anarchism without adjectives? In the words of historian George Richard Eisenwine, anarchism without adjectives in its broadest sense, open quote, referred to an unhyphenated form of anarchism, that is, a doctrine without any qualifying labels such as communist, collectivist, mutualist, or individualist. For others, it was simply understood as an attitude that tolerated the coexistence of different anarchist schools. End quote. The originator of the expression was Cuban-born Fernando Tarrida del Marmol, who used it in November 1889 in Barcelona. He directed his comments towards the communist and collectivist anarchists in Spain, who at the time were having an intense debate over the merits of their two theories. Anarchism without adjectives was an attempt to show greater tolerance between anarchist tendencies and to be clear that anarchists should not impose a preconceived economic plan on anyone, even in theory. Thus, the economic preferences of anarchists should be of secondary importance to abolishing capitalism and the state, with free experimentation the one rule of a free society. Thus, the theoretical perspective known as Anarchismo sin Adjectives, anarchism without adjectives, was one of the byproducts of an intense debate within the movement itself. The roots of the argument can be found in the development of communist anarchism after Bakunin's death in 1876. While not entirely dissimilar to collectivist anarchism, as can be seen from James Guillaume's famous work on building the new social order within Bakunin on anarchism, the collectivists did see their economic system evolving into free communism. Communist anarchists developed, deepened, and enriched Bakunin's work, just as Bakunin had developed, deepened, and enriched Proudhon's. Communist anarchism was associated with such anarchists as Élisée Reclus, Carlo Cafiero, Enrico Malatesta, and, most famously, Peter Kropotkin. Quickly, communist anarchist ideas replaced collectivist anarchism as the main anarchist tendency in Europe, except in Spain. Here, the major issue was not the question of communism, although for Ricardo Mella this played a part, but a question of the modification of strategy and tactics implied by communist anarchism. At this time, the 1880s, the communist anarchists stressed local, pure cells of anarchist militants generally opposed trade unionism, although Kropotkin was not one of these as he saw the importance of militant workers' organizations, as well as being somewhat anti-organization as well. Unsurprisingly, such a change in strategy and tactics came in for a lot of discussion from the Spanish collectivists who strongly supported working-class organization and struggle. This conflict soon spread outside of Spain, and the discussion found its way into the pages of La Révolte in Paris. This provoked many anarchists to agree with Malatesta's argument that, open quote, it is not right for us, to say the least, to fall into strife over mere hypotheses, end quote. Over time, most anarchists agreed, to use Netlau's words, that, open quote, we cannot foresee the economic development of the future, end quote, and so started to stress what they had in common, opposition to capitalism and the state, rather than to different visions of how a free society would operate. As time progressed, most communist anarchists saw that ignoring the labor movement ensured that their ideas did not reach the working class, while most collectivist anarchists stressed their commitment to communist ideals and their arrival sooner rather than later after a revolution. Thus, both groups of anarchists could work together as there was, open quote, no reason for splitting up into small schools in our eagerness to overemphasize certain features subject to variation in time and place of the society of the future, which is too remote from us to permit us to envision all its adjustments and possible combinations. Moreover, in a free society, the methods and the individual forms of association and agreements, or the organization of labor and of social life, will not be uniform, and we cannot, at this moment, make and forecast or determinations concerning them, end quote. Thus, Malatesta continued, open quote, even the question as between anarchist collectivism and anarchist communism is a matter of qualification, of method and agreement. as the key is that no matter the system, a new moral conscience will come into being, which will make the wage system repugnant to men and women, just as legal slavery and compulsion are now repugnant to them. If this happens, then, whatever the specific forms of society may turn out to be, the basis of social organization will be communist. As long as we hold to fundamental principles and do our utmost to instill them in the masses, we need not quarrel over mere words or trifles, but give post-revolutionary society a direction towards justice, equality, and liberty." End quote. Similarly, in the United States, there was also an intense debate at the same time between individualist and communist anarchists. There, Benjamin Tucker was arguing that communist anarchists were not anarchists, while John Most was saying similar things about Tucker's ideas. Just as people like Mella and Tarida put forward the idea of tolerance between anarchist groups, so anarchists like Valterine de Clercq came to label herself simply anarchist, and called, like Malatesta, for an anarchism without adjectives, since in the absence of government, many different experiments would probably be tried in various localities in order to determine the most appropriate form. End quote. In her own words, a whole range of economic systems would be, open quote, advantageously tried in different localities. I would see the instincts and habits of the people express themselves in a free choice in every community, and I am sure that distinct environments would call out distinct adaptations. End quote. Consequently, individualist and communist anarchist, open quote, forms of society, as well as many intermediations, would, in the absence of government, be tried in various localities according to the instincts and material condition of the people. Liberty and experiment alone can determine the best forms of society. Therefore, I no longer label myself otherwise than anarchist simply. End quote. These debates had a lasting impact on the anarchist movement, with such noted anarchists as de Clercq, Malatesta, Nettlau, and Reclus adopting the tolerant perspective embodied in the expression anarchism without adjectives. See Nettlau's A Short History of Anarchism, pages 195 to 201, for an excellent summary of this. It is also, we add, the dominant position within the anarchist movement today, with most anarchists recognizing the right of other tendencies to the name anarchist while, obviously, having their own preferences for specific types of anarchist theory and their own arguments why other types are flawed. However, we must stress that the different forms of anarchism, communism, syndicalism, religious, etc., are not mutually exclusive, and you do not have to support one and hate the others. This tolerance is reflected in the expression anarchism without adjectives. One last point. Some anarcho-capitalists have attempted to use the tolerance associated with anarchism without adjectives to argue that their ideology should be accepted as part of the anarchist movement. After all, they argue, anarchism is just about getting rid of the state. Economics is of secondary importance. However, such a use of anarchism without adjectives is bogus, as it was commonly agreed at the time that the types of economics that were being discussed were anti-capitalist, i.e. socialistic. For Malatesta, for example, there were, open quote, anarchists who foresee and propose other solution, other future forms of social organization than communist anarchism, but they desire, just as we do, to destroy political power and private property. Let us do away, he argued, with all exclusivism of schools of thinking, and let us come to an understanding on ways and means and go forwards. End quote. In other words, it was agreed that capitalism had to be abolished along with the state, and once this was the case, free experimentation would develop. Thus, the struggle against the state was just one part of a wider struggle to end oppression and exploitation and could not be isolated from these wider aims. As anarcho-capitalists do not seek the abolition of capitalism along with the state, they are not anarchists, and so anarchism without adjectives does not apply to the so-called anarchist capitalists. See Section F on why anarcho-capitalism is not anarchist. This is not to say that after a revolution, anarcho-capitalist communities would not exist. Far from it. If a group of people wanted to form such a system, then they could, just as we would expect a community which supported state socialism or theocracy to live under that regime. Such enclaves of hierarchy would exist simply because it is unlikely that everyone on the planet, or even in a given geographical area, will become anarchists all at the same time. The key thing to remember is that no such system would be anarchist, and consequently is not anarchism without adjectives.